The spark. Birth of the machine age, 1760, 1820. The world was sleeping. For thousands of years, life moved at the pace of a walking horse, the strength of a human arm, the whim of the weather. Then, between 1760 and 1820, in a damp green island called Britain, humanity stumbled upon a new source of power that would shatter this ancient rhythm forever. This is not just the story of machines, it is the story of the moment we invented the modern world. The pre-industrial world was one of profound limitation. Over 80% of the global population lived in rural areas, their lives dictated by the agricultural calendar. Life expectancy hovered around 30-35 years. Energy came from muscles, human and animal, and from the unreliable forces of wind and water. Production was a local affair. A weaver might take a week to produce a single bolt of cloth on a hand loom in their cottage. A blacksmith would forge tools one by one for his village. The scale of everything was small, slow, and expensive. This was the world of cottage industry, a world on the brink of extinction. Why Britain? The conditions were a perfect storm. It possessed abundant coal and iron ore, the raw materials for an age of iron and steam, a stable political system and a culture that embraced scientific inquiry and practical invention created a fertile ground for innovation. A growing population provided both labor and demand. Crucially, Britain had a wealthy class of merchants and landowners with capital to invest, looking for new ways to generate profit. All the ingredients were in the pot. It only needed a spark. That spark was the textile industry. The demand for cotton cloth was insatiable, but the process of spinning thread was a bottleneck. It took 8 spinners to keep one weaver supplied. This imbalance was shattered by a series of inventions that mechanized the process. James Hargreaves' spinning jenny, 1764, allowed one worker to spin 8 spools of thread at once. Richard Arkwright's water frame, 1769, used water power to produce a stronger thread. Samuel Crompton's spinning mule, 1779, combined these ideas to produce vast quantities of high-quality yarn. Almost overnight, the bottleneck was broken. Weaving couldn't keep up until Edmund Cartwright's power loom, 1785, automated that process too. The center of production shifted decisively from the quiet cottage to the roaring, centralized factory. But these new machines needed more power than men, animals, or water wheels could reliably provide. The answer was lurking deep underground in Britain's coal mines. To pump water out of flooded mines, Thomas Newcomen had built a crude, inefficient steam engine. It was a Scottish instrument maker, James Watt, who transformed this clumsy pump into a true engine of change. Between 1765 and 1776, Watt added a separate condenser, making the steam engine vastly more powerful and efficient. Watt's partner, Matthew Boulton, famously declared they were selling what all the world desires, power. This was the true breakthrough. For the first time in history, humanity had a source of power that was reliable, portable, and virtually unlimited. The steam engine became the beating heart of the factory, pumping life into looms, presses, and hammers. The factory system was the new social universe created by these machines. It was a world of discipline, monotony, and noise. Workers, who had once controlled their own pace and time, now had to adapt to the relentless rhythm of the machine. The factory whistle regimented their lives. The division of labor broke complex crafts into simple, repetitive tasks, increasing efficiency but draining work of its skill and soul. Cities like Manchester exploded into being, becoming Cottonopolis, the shock city of the age. These were unplanned, chaotic, and brutal places. They were engines of production, but also of human misery, with overcrowded slums, rampant disease, and profound pollution. The social contract between worker and employer was being rewritten in soot and steam. The agricultural world was also being upended. Jethro Tull's seed drill and Charles Townshend's crop rotation methods dramatically increased food yields. This British agricultural revolution was a prerequisite for the industrial one. It freed up labor from the fields to work in the new urban factories. Meanwhile, the need to move vast quantities of coal, iron, and finished goods spawned a transportation revolution. First came canals, man-made rivers that slashed the cost of moving heavy materials. Then, the steam engine took to the rails. Richard Trevithick and George Stephenson's rocket locomotive inaugurated the age of the railway. Distances that once took days now took hours. The world was physically shrinking, and markets were becoming national. By 1820, the transformation was undeniable, but still concentrated. Britain stood alone as the workshop of the world. Its landscape was now scarred by mine shafts and factory chimneys, its cities teeming with a new social class, the industrial proletariat. The pace of life had accelerated. The concept of progress was born. The machine, once a curiosity, was now the dominant force shaping human society. The spark had been struck. The fire was lit. And, as we will see in Part 2, this fire would soon rage across the globe, consuming old empires and forging new ones in its white-hot furnace. Next, the forging. Global domination and social upheaval, 1820-1900. If the first phase of the Industrial Revolution was a spark in Britain, the century that followed was a global wildfire. The technologies born in English workshops did not stay there. They spread, adapted, and mutated, reshaping continents, redrawing the global balance of power, and unleashing social forces that would define the modern era. This was the age of iron, coal, and empire, an age of unprecedented wealth and profound poverty, an age of utopian dreams and brutal realities. The British, possessing a formidable head start, guarded their technological secrets fiercely. Laws forbade the export of machinery and the emigration of skilled mechanics. But knowledge is a leaky vessel. Entrepreneurs like Samuel Slater memorized the designs of Arkwright's water frame and brought them to America, founding the first successful textile mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island in 1793, effectively pirating the Industrial Revolution across the Atlantic. In Europe, nations like Belgium, France, and Germany, recognizing Britain's overwhelming advantage, embarked on state-sponsored programs of industrial espionage and development. They copied British technology, built their own rail networks, and exploited their own coal fields. By the mid-19th century, the revolution was no longer British, it was Western. The single most transformative invention of this period was the railway. It was more than just a mode of transport. It was a total system that reshaped geography, economics, and time itself. Vast continents like North America and Russia were stitched together by bands of steel. The U.S. Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, united the nation and sealed the fate of the Great Plains. Railways created national markets for the first time, allowing goods from one coast to be sold on the other. They demanded immense quantities of iron, steel, and coal, fueling the very industries that built them. They even standardized time, leading to the creation of time zones to coordinate schedules. The world was not just shrinking, it was being systematized. This new industrial system ran on fossil fuels. Coal was king. Its sooty energy powered the steam engines, smelted the iron, and heated the cities. The landscape of places like the Ruhr Valley in Germany, Pennsylvania in the US, and of course Britain itself was dominated by the coal mine and the steel mill. The Bessemer process, invented in the 1850s, made mass-produced steel a reality. Steel was stronger and more versatile than iron, and it became the skeleton of the modern world, the framework for railways, ships, bridges, and the soaring skyscrapers that would soon pierce urban skylines. The age of iron gave way to the age of steel. The global economy was now a hierarchy, with the industrial core of Western Europe and the northeastern United States at its center. The rest of the world was relegated to the periphery, serving as suppliers of raw materials and consumers of finished goods. This was the economic logic of the new imperialism. India's handloom textile industry, once the envy of the world, was deliberately dismantled by British policy to create a market for Manchester's machine-made cloth. Egypt and the American South became monoculture plantations, growing cotton for the mills of Lancashire and New England. Latin America provided copper, rubber, and nitrates. Africa was carved up at the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, its borders drawn not by tradition, but by the resource needs of European powers. The Industrial Revolution had created the tools, the steamship, the machine gun, the telegraph, that made this rapid, brutal colonization possible. Within the industrializing nations, society was being torn apart and reassembled. Two new classes now faced each other across a widening chasm. The industrial bourgeoisie, the factory owners, bankers, and entrepreneurs who owned the means of production, and the industrial proletariat, the mass of wage laborers who owned nothing but their ability to work. The middle class grew in size and influence, championing values of thrift, hard work, and moral respectability. For the working class, life was a relentless struggle. Men, women, and children labored for 14, 16 hours a day in dangerous conditions for meager wages. Urban slums like London's East End were cauldrons of cholera, tuberculosis, and despair. Out of this misery, a new consciousness was born. Workers began to organize, forming trade unions to bargain collectively for better pay and conditions. The Wuppertal Luddites of the early 19th century had smashed machines in a futile attempt to halt progress. Now, workers sought to tame the machine and claim a fairer share of the wealth it created. The writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, most famously the Communist Manifesto, 1848, provided a powerful critique of this new industrial capitalism, predicting a class struggle that would reshape the coming century. The political landscape was fracturing into new ideologies: liberalism, socialism, conservatism, all grappling with the social question: how to manage the disruptive power of industrial society. By 1900, the world was unrecognizable to someone from 1760. The West was armed with industrial might, its cities glowing with gaslight and humming with electric telegraphs. Its empires spanned the globe, but this power was built on a foundation of social tension and global inequality. The forge of industry had created immense power, but it had also heated the crucible of class conflict and imperial rivalry to a boiling point. The system was incredibly productive, but also profoundly unstable. As we will see in the final part, the very forces the revolution unleashed, mass production, nationalism, and technological competition, would soon lead the world into the fiery cataclysm of total war, and beyond into a new, even more accelerated age of innovation. The Accelerator. The second wave in the modern world, 1900 present. The First World War was the terrible, logical conclusion of the First Industrial Revolution. It was an industrial war, fought with mass-produced weapons, supplied by railways and powered by coal. The machine gun, the product of precision engineering, slaughtered a generation. The battlefields were a hellscape created by industrial chemistry and physics. In its aftermath, a new phase of technological change accelerated, one that would move beyond steam and iron into a world of internal combustion, electricity, silicon, and information. This is the story of how the Industrial Revolution evolved into the permanent revolution that defines our lives today. The period from 1870 to 1914 is often called the Second Industrial Revolution. Its hallmarks were new sources of power, new materials, and new science-based industries. The first revolution was built on the mechanical ingenuity of tinkerers. The second was driven by the systematic application of chemistry and physics in corporate and university laboratories. The most transformative new power source was oil. Refined into gasoline and diesel, it fueled the internal combustion engine. This engine, smaller and more efficient than a steam engine, made possible the automobile and the airplane. Henry Ford didn't invent the car, but his moving assembly line, 1913, perfected the logic of the factory, making car ownership a reality for the masses and creating modern consumer culture. Simultaneously, a new form of energy began to illuminate the world: electricity. The work of pioneers like Thomas Edison, the practical light bulb and power station, and Nikola Tesla, alternating current systems, meant that power could now be generated centrally and transmitted over vast distances. Electricity was clean, flexible, and silent. It powered everything from the factory motor to the home refrigerator, transforming domestic life and creating new industries around appliances and entertainment. The world was being wired together, its nights banished by the electric light. This new technological system demanded new forms of organization. To manage the vast capital required for steel mills, chemical plants, and railway networks, the modern corporation was born. These were massive, hierarchical bureaucracies that could coordinate production and distribution on a global scale. This was the era of Fordism and Taylorism, the scientific management of work to extract maximum efficiency from every human movement. Production was not just mechanized, it was rationalized. The scale of enterprise became truly global, with companies like Standard Oil and United Fruit controlling entire global supply chains. The two world wars acted as terrifying accelerators of this process. The imperative to kill and survive funneled unprecedented state resources into research and development, yielding technologies that would later define peacetime, radar, jet engines, synthetic rubber, antibiotics, and most ominously, nuclear power. The Manhattan Project, which produced the atomic bomb, was the ultimate expression of industrialized science, a vast, secret state-corporate academic collaboration. The Cold War that followed continued this trend, with the space race and the arms drive spurring the development of computers, satellites, and the internet. This set the stage for the Third Industrial Revolution, or the Digital Revolution. The transition from mechanical and analog electronic technology to digital electronics began in the mid-20th century. The invention of the transistor, 1947, and the integrated circuit, microchip, miniaturized computing power. What once required a room-sized machine could now fit in the palm of a hand. The personal computer, pioneered by companies like Apple and Microsoft, democratized information processing. The creation of the World Wide Web in the 1990s connected these computers into a global network, revolutionizing communication, commerce, and culture, just as the railways had revolutionized transport a century before. Today, we are living through what many call the Fourth Industrial Revolution, characterized by a fusion of technologies blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres. It is built on the infrastructure of the digital revolution, but is defined by artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, genetic engineering, and quantum computing. The logic of the factory has escaped its walls. Our data is the new raw material, harvested and refined by algorithmic machines. The pace of change is no longer generational. It is constant and disruptive. The long arc of the Industrial Revolution, from the first steam engines to AI, has delivered unimaginable prosperity and technological wonders. Global life expectancy has more than doubled. Extreme poverty has plummeted. We have split the atom, walked on the moon, and mapped the human genome. But the challenges it spawned are also with us, magnified to a planetary scale. The carbon dioxide released by burning the coal and oil that powered the revolution is now overheating the planet, creating a climate crisis. The social inequalities laid bare in 19th century Manchester are replicated in the vast wealth gaps between and within nations today. The nature of work is being transformed once again, with automation threatening to render entire professions obsolete. The Industrial Revolution was not a single event that ended. It was the moment humanity stepped onto a treadmill of perpetual innovation that is still accelerating. It gave us power over our environment, but also responsibility for its consequences. It connected humanity as never before, but also created new forms of fragmentation and control. We are all children of this revolution, living in a world it made, grappling with the questions it posed. How do we distribute the vast wealth our machines create?